Is it going?
It is.
It is going. Okay.
Hi.
So, hello. I am Rush Lilavivat. I am the tabletop panels director at DragonCon. And so if there are panels on tabletop, I'm the one who's responsible for them ultimately. And we have some guests with us today to talk about gaming in the time of COVID. So I will let them introduce themselves and what they have to do with tabletop games. Go ahead, take it away, Brianna and Jason.
I'm Brianna Marie.
What do you do?
Oh, I thought we were going back. I am on the Dungeons and Randomness podcast. We run currently 9 different D&D groups. Many of them take place in the same world, not all of them, because the Patreon ones are separate. So we do a lot of online gaming and scheduling and playing virtually, because I think the biggest cluster we have is like 3 people living in the same state.
Yeah.
So we definitely have a lot of experience with that.
My name is Jason Massey. I've been hosting Dungeons and Randomness since 2012. I started doing the scheduling, and then I went mad, and then Bree took over, and we just wrote a book too. So yeah, that has nothing to do with the panel, just a thing.
What is the book? One more time.
Oh, The Adventurer's Guide to Theria. It is one of our continents, just basically 400 pages of everything we've done on the show so far that people have been requesting for years. So, yeah. That should be on sale by the time this goes up, maybe? Should be. By the end of August, it should be.
Okay. Then that's cool. Yeah, it should be on sale at that time. Okay, Rob?
I'm Robert Schwalb. Let's see, what do I do? Aside from being vulgar and angry and listening to death metal, I also make tabletop games. Shadow of the Demon Lord, Punk Apocalyptic, the forthcoming Shadow of the Weird Wizard, formerly known as Shadow of the Mad Wizard. And then before that, I worked on Dungeons & Dragons for many, many years, and I worked on just a variety of other games, from Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay to Song of Ice and Fire, and so on. So yeah, I've been around.
Yes. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to get people who are essentially, who are industry insiders, okay? And just kind of talk about, almost in a sort of a roundtable way, about just looking at the time of COVID through the eyes of gaming. And the reason being is because I wanted to do that was because, for us, I'm sure, gaming is a big part of our life. I think I really understood that when Gary Gygax died, and it really hit me really hard. I'm like, why is this hitting me this hard? I mean, so he's a big deal, And then I began to, and as I was thinking about it, I said, all my enduring friendships, all of them that are long-lasting, the ones that have lasted for, 40 years, they've all been made through gaming, those lasting relationships. So I was like, wow. So that's when it really hit me that how important that aspect of my life was to me. Because without it, I wouldn't have those enduring relationships. And so that's all we are as human beings. We are our relationships with each other. So because tabletop gaming is one of those things that forges those sorts of relationships, I just wanted to look at it through those eyes. The time of COVID, all those things. And we may get into a little bit about the other things that have been going on during the time of COVID, protests and things like that. Oh. We may touch on that as well. But to start us off, I just want to share this with you real quick. Real quick. Yes. So this is a snippet of an extremely unscientific poll I took on Cancellation Con. Have you guys seen that? Have you on Facebook?
I think I've heard of it.
Yeah.
Cancellation. It's a Facebook group that was started by people who are disappointed that their favorite conventions were canceled. And so it's become like this massive Geek Hangout, where people are just talking about geek things. And it's been, for me, a great haven during this time because it's overwhelmingly positive. Everything on there is very, very positive, and doesn't have anything to do with COVID or politics or anything. But so this is what I posted this poll, and the results of it I thought were very, very interesting. It says right here, those of you who do tabletop gaming, board game or RPG, are you able to keep gaming through online means? Has it hurt your gaming life, helped it, or is it somewhere in between? So right here, it's 72 respondents said, I game much less. So that's at least 50%. You've had at least 50% of a loss of gaming. 71 say they game just as much because they've now hopped online. 50 say, I game now more than I did before because you can use online to reach people. And so one of the things that was discussed on that thread was, now I don't have to drive somewhere. I can just hop online to go talk to my buddies or whatever. And I could maybe even do the dishes while I'm doing it. So if you look at this very, very carefully, it's almost like a bell curve, right? I game just as much through online means is at 71. I game much less at 72, but I game more is at 50, right? So it's almost kind of like a bell curve. But now this is interesting. About 40 people said quarantine has killed my tabletop RPG life. This is I game a little less. So it's reduced, but not by 50%. 21 people said that. 5 people said I switched from board card games to video gaming. I thought that would be higher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do far less gaming because I don't do online tabletop games. Only 5 people said that. Again, I thought that would be higher. I game now more than I did before because I have more time on my hands for. So a few people game actually more now. And then I'm gaming more because it's easier to coordinate with my groups online than in person too. So tell me about what you see there. Just respond to that for real quick.
Honestly, the first thought that jumps to mind is I wonder how many of these people are so impacted because they refuse to take their game online. Because I know that there's, like, it's not the same as sitting around a table with your friends. It's not, some people need that live experience and it's too clinical online or too removed. It's too sanitized. But I was just talking to somebody that, like, our UPS driver who just happened to ask, just what's like, what do you do? And it's like, oh God, okay. And I told him, and he's like, yeah, I used to get together with a group, and just I don't want to do it online because it seems like a hassle. So I just wonder how many of those people haven't tried it yet.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's that one option right there. I do far less gaming because I don't really do online tabletop games. But there are only 5 people said that. Again, very unscientific poll, extremely unscientific. But it's just something to talk about. It's interesting. Rob, what do you think? How do you respond to this?
I think that it shows that there is still a great amount of interest in it, but I think it also shows that the medium may not be as satisfying for everybody. I know just anecdotally that we've seen a big impact on how we game now, if we even do it all.
Right.
So it's yeah. I mean, I get it. There's a lot of gaming. It's just different.
Yeah. I also, I wonder, there's a few things that can also be done, because I think that it also might be an access issue where some people, for Jason and I, and for most of the people on the cast, I think at this point all the people on the cast, because everyone's been on for at least a year, we're so used to it that we've figured out all of the things that make it a little bit easier and a little bit more personable. Like something as simple as getting an Ethernet cable can really change the complete experience of online playing, because once you have a faster connection, then you can use video. And then, like, you bring a light into the room and it feels more like you're all playing together again. And I think for a lot of people who worked regular jobs before COVID, and who still are now, some of them, but they don't have those tools at their disposal because they've never had to have them before, because it's easier to just meet up in person. So like maybe watching something like this, they can get a few tips and tricks for how to make their game feel more like it did pre-COVID.
Gotcha. That's a good point. That's certainly been my experience. Exactly what you said. I've actually been a little bit impressed at some of the things that I've noticed through gaming through Zoom. So for example, Zoom is pretty awesome because it has a whiteboard, so I can draw things on there. It is very easy to share my screen, like as I just showed you, so I can share clips off of YouTube and all that sort of thing, which you could do at the tabletop. But the thing is that when I was doing it in the tabletop and then in person, if I had my computer, I hated looking over here and then looking back and then looking over here. I felt very distracted. But by having everything on the same screen, I don't feel nearly as distracted. I can even talk to people while I'm looking at my notes and that sort of thing. It's the most organized I've ever been for gaming by far, because because again, it's right there in front of me. I don't mind pulling up a spreadsheet with NPCs on it and things like that. And then they can keep going if people are role playing and I don't need to be involved, I hate turning away and looking at my laptop. That one little turn away, it's very difficult for me. But again, if you're right there, your face is right there, it's easy. So I've been actually pretty impressed. The thing I miss is, and maybe you guys can help me with this, I can't really play music for my buddies when we're gaming. Do you guys have a solution for that or a way to put that through?
We don't do that on the podcast. We do all that in post. And I don't know Zoom quite as well as I bet you already do because you've been using it. I know on Discord you can add music bots that you just type a little thing and they'll play it, and you can set the sound to a certain level.
Okay.
So you can definitely do that on Discord.
There's all kinds of virtual cables and stuff you could set up to run what you're hearing through your mic input, basically, to feed it to everybody. But that stuff I don't even mess with, just because it makes the recording a little less reliable and all that. But basically, if you want it bad enough, you can set it up. There's absolutely tutorials online. I'm sure there's plenty of YouTube videos about it to walk you through it step by step. I want to refer back to the poll for just a second, because something that's a little shocking to me is, you would think now more than ever, I know a lot of people have time on their hands.
Yeah.
To kind of learn, like, let's say you don't usually play online, or you don't even have a group. You can go on Reddit, you can go on Facebook, you can go on Twitter, and usually find people to play with. And you'd think, with this year being what it is, I've never wanted to be lost in a fantasy world more than in 2020. So I would think more people would give it a shot now.
That's a great point. So what Rob, I want you to respond to this. What I'm sensing is sort of like it really, really, really depends on the person.
Right. One of the things that I was thinking about was how it could even be almost a generational difference as well. I don't think I've been gaming far longer before I was able to even think about doing this kind of interface than I have now. And I know that with my particular gaming group, the COVID has been a big drain on most of our mental health, and it is. And at a certain point, I think it's just attrition. In our case, we have been Mask of Nyarlathotep for Call of Cthulhu, and it was going pretty well, but I am concerned about just the grind, and I'm seeing that a lot of my gaming group is starting to fall apart as people are just doing other things, or it's just trying to be able to, I don't know, just can't commit to the routine anymore as much as I had been able to. I know I'm the same way. I would probably rather play a board game online than have to try to juggle a bunch of house cats and get everybody in the same place at the same time. So it's certainly different for my experience on this front, because I had at one point prior to the explosion, we were running a game twice a week, every week, and now we're lucky to get in one game every 2.
Right. Okay. So let me ask you this then. This is something that I've noted in the community, especially when it comes to online tabletop games, and especially RPGs, tabletop RPGs. There, for some people, if they're doing it, let's say it doesn't have to be any online means. It could be Roll20, it could be with Discord, et cetera, or Google Hangouts. In that household, there may be this perception that, well, you're not really doing something, right? So let's say there's a woman who's gaming online, but the kids are like, well, you're on the computer. You're not really hanging out with people. So they feel they feel more liberated or more enabled to interrupt. I when I used to try to do that, my wife, just to be frank, would be, she would not think nothing of asking me to go do something, but because I'm on the computer, I'm not really with anybody. And then this podcast I listened to had great advice. They were like, so even when you do that, you need to make sure that you let everybody in your house know I'm doing something. I'm actually with people. I'm not playing some video game or whatever.
Right. We 15 minutes ago, we sent Elle a message. We're getting started now. Elle is Jason's wife and my roommate. And yeah, I think it's incredibly important to as soon as you schedule, honestly, let everyone you know that lives with you the same way you would if all of your friends were coming over to game. Because then they know to leave you alone during that period of time, plan for dinner or something, whatever they would normally do. But that's a really tough one too, because
I honestly, I didn't know that was a thing. I'll be honest. Okay, someone walking in and they didn't, I didn't know you were on the thing. But I feel like that's something my parents would have done. Like that, you're not really talking to anybody. If you're sitting there speaking to somebody, they could see that. At least treat it with the same dignity a phone call gets. I feel like you're interrupting somebody, your conversation. That's so weird to me that would be a thing. I guess there is a disconnect for people that it's well, you're not actually sitting there, so you could just get up and walk away.
Rob, what do you think? Is that?
I think it may also be just how people would prioritize it, right? If you're getting together with your friends once or twice a week to play a game online, then there's something different about the commitment to just jumping on, because you're not really doing anything. I see what you're coming from. You're not really doing anything particular. You're not going to go meet them or see them in person or shake hands or exchange hugs or grab a few beers together. This is just something we can do or not. And it doesn't have the same level of import. And I think that certainly does for a lot of people, and thank goodness for that. But I could definitely see how some people would find that this is almost trivial compared to other concerns or other things.
Children, or pets, or the garbage needs to be taken out right now.
For me, all of my friends I've met online. It was all of my friends I've met. Yeah, like this one. So that's the time I get to talk to them. We're all people with, significant others and jobs and kids and all that stuff.
And it helps that you met your significant other online, so she understands.
So that's how I get to see that the one time we maybe get to see each other in person is Dragon Con, and that's not even happening this year in person. So it's, to me, that's precious. So I guess I just assume everyone treated it that way too.
So I guess everything with a relationship with a significant other is if the behavior continues, then maybe just sit down with them and explain how important it is to you and how you'd like them to respect that. And hopefully that dialogue will fix it.
No, yeah, I think so. I think a lot of times when I've seen this sort of thing happen, it's one of the interesting things about gaming, and one of the most difficult things is there are all these unspoken rules.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time, people don't talk about the unspoken rules. They just kind of exist. and then someone breaks one of these unspoken rules and they don't even know what they've done, or they didn't realize it until they broke the rule. And so it's good to bring those things out in the open. So that for people who struggle with online gaming for that reason, yeah, if you just sit down and talk with the person, that'd be like, hey, look, no, there's a thing going on here. This is what the dynamic is. Let's fix that. Rob, with your group, is that why you think your group struggles to be online? Because there's that sort of disconnect, like this is not what I would prefer to do. I'd much rather meet in person, or
Yeah, I think I know that I have difficulty doing, and even before this, when I would even do podcasts or interviews and things along those lines, I find it difficult because I interact better with people face to face. And so there are certain cues and social cues that you can pick up on that is harder sometimes to perceive through a camera or through a screen. I've also found it difficult to have a Robert Altman style cross table talk using Discord or other. It usually becomes a one person at a time, and so you have to be. So it makes it more of a challenge, I think, on my end, and probably for those of my players as well, to maintain. I mean, granted, I think we did a really good job. We were able to sustain our gaming group for 4 months, and we're still trucking along, but it's starting to fray a bit at the edges. And I think that it's probably a combination of, I would rather smoke a bowl, or I would rather get drunk or spend time with a real person who might be my spouse, or throw my hands up and say, screw it, and I'm just going to go out, or whatever, right? And so it's just in the hierarchy of things you can do, I guess it can sometimes fall lower and lower. And that's certainly my case.
Okay.
Well, those first two things you can definitely still do while that's part of the good thing about being able to game online. You don't have to drive home.
Right. That is very, very true. Which has not helped my drinking habit at all. But
we've all developed a drinking habit in 2020.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah.
I guess speaking only for myself, our gaming group, the reason it has done as well as it has and it met as well as it has, most of us are fairly isolated, and so we really need that interaction.
Yeah.
Every time we meet, we're all like, oh, thank God, adult conversation. So, most of us have kids and that sort of thing. And some of us in our gaming groups are in the middle of like 3 things in their life. And so they really make it a priority. So I think that's why we've been able to meet. Interesting. Very, very interesting. Like I didn't expect to come here with like 3 different perspectives. I didn't know what to expect, really. Go ahead.
Coming into this, like, okay, I would describe myself as an introvert. You're an introvert. Mm-hmm. Rob, if I'm going to bet money, have you found yourself, now that the option's been stripped away, like even like I could spend long periods of time by myself, but like every once in a while, do you feel like you have that need? It's like I got to get a drink with somebody. I got to talk to somebody. Something.
I am thoroughly an extrovert.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. I have to be.
Wow.
I feed on conversation and having face-to-face interactions. I would be out every night if I could.
I would have lost money.
And I have been working, and that's what makes the whole job such an interesting challenge, because I've spent the better part of 19 years working in my house with cats as company. So I am very fortunate to have a couple of bars that I go to that I have my extended network of friends who are not always related to the business side. And so I can have, like a vampire, feed upon their good energy. So this has just been doubly hard for me, because and with my wife being in her situation, there really just isn't. It's just a lot of isolation. And I know that
I feel really bad for extroverts right now. My sister's one too.
It's been a challenge.
Tough.
Wow. So, Brianna, if you don't mind, you said your sister's been having a hard time with it?
Yeah. She's a super hardcore extrovert, and she actually just recently moved because she could move to where she could be with her husband's family. Like, they could all live in the same house for a while, so safe COVID. So she did that just so she could be around people again, because she was so isolated from everybody. She's on the show too, so we could talk to her. I think we have a few extroverts on the show who we can tell are going a little stir crazy.
Oh yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. I have 2 children who are extroverts. So what's funny is that they're because they're extroverts, they're energy vampires, because they've got to constantly talk to you and tell you about everything they've done throughout the day. And so I'm actually the opposite. There are long stretches where I'm like, okay, I can't talk to you right now. Cheers. I'm going to read a book. you have your things that you can do. But ironically, because I have these 2 children, I've done more gaming than I've ever done in my life. It's been weird. We're playing board games constantly, all kinds of board games. My son has run 2 different D&D campaigns. We finished a Starfinder campaign that lasted 2 years. So
Nice.
we had all this time. So I'm like, okay, they were like, let's go, let's finish this campaign. So we finished that. So actually, yeah, I've done like an incredible amount of gaming. And before we got on and started doing this, because a lot of my friends are also extroverts and they're desperate to talk to people, we've done a lot of board gaming online without virtual tabletop. What we've done is we've literally had like the phone, just like holding it over the board and like them telling us what to do. We're gonna try to do it. I've got some friends who constructed Legos, things to hold their phones over a certain parts of the board.
That's clever.
So we're going to try that with this game called Sagrada, where you look at it, you're constantly looking at grid. So we're going to try to do that and see if that works. But
I could see some games that would be hard for, like games where you have private cards. Like
yes,
yeah,
very much.
I have a 3D printer. I instantly started thinking about harnesses and stuff you could build. Like,
just real quick, they have a setup like so hanging from their living room lamp. They have a thing that will hold their phone over the table, so that they can play with. Yeah, they can play with other people and they can see the board. So it's pretty crazy. So let's talk about the other thing that has blown up during this time, which is there's been a lot of social unrest, and society has changed very rapidly. I mean, I've never seen anything like it before in my lifetime, and the rate that things have changed and the way opinions have changed. Does that apply to gaming at all, or no? It doesn't really apply to gaming.
well, I mean, I think people play what they know, so of course that's going to apply. Of course, people are going to take real life experiences and come into it. I'll be honest. I got a lot of emails where people will tell me about their campaigns, and the amount of people who just want to play a campaign where you overthrows a wannabe dictator or a wannabe, you can't not point to society right now and say, yeah, that's probably an influence. Things are pretty grim. So it's got to play a part.
Mm-hmm.
So those emails and things like that, you said they've gotten grimmer.
The campaigns have gotten grimmer. People have, yes, their depression has gotten worse too. But like that's one of the things is you reach out to talk to somebody about it and stuff. And I think the stories that people are telling if gaming is power fantasy, like of course you're going to point to something that you have no control over in real life. Or you feel like a situation is helpless and you want to right or wrong. So of course, yeah.
Rob, how about you? Do you think that gaming applies to all this social change?
Oh, certainly. We can see it on a large scale about what kind of content people are willing to accept and how we produce content and the words we use and the underlying assumptions that have driven design in certain genres of the game for the last 40 plus years. For example, yesterday. Yeah, it was yesterday. Yesterday, the guy who takes care of my website, pointed out that on Twitter that there were a couple of people who objected to my use of the word "mad" in the title "Shadow of the Mad Wizard," and when at first I reacted negatively, not publicly, but I really had a hard time with this because I felt that as a person who has struggled with mental health for the last 20 years or more, that I get to decide if I'm going to, I should be able to decide how I use this word. And I'm using it in the way I'm using it for a very particular reason. Now, I understand that when you look at that through the lens of Shadow of the Demon Lord, where the arch nemesis, big, super scary bad guy is the Demon Lord, one could then make the leap that the Mad Wizard is stepping into those shoes, which is not the case at all in this game. Rather, there's a line, but we could call it the Shadow of the Unicorn Princess, and it would be the same thing. It wouldn't necessarily suggest that the Unicorn Princess is the bad person in this game, although it certainly could be. In my case, the Mad Wizard was supposed to be my cartoon version of myself, who is disappeared from the setting and is called Mad because he is unpredictable, somewhat unhinged, and has left the world in disarray and is very eccentric. And he has vanished, and which is what the driving plot is as people are filling into this particular corner of the world. So it is his absence that drives the narrative of this game rather than him being the antagonist. But because I didn't communicate that clearly, the pushback was there, the feelings were hurt. And so in order to demonstrate my goodwill, I have certainly changed the name to Weird Wizard, which will be just fine. But we could see the same, and to a larger degree, reactions to the use of race in Dungeons & Dragons. In Shadow of the Demon Lord, for example, I'd made a decision early on to jettison that loaded word for something a little bit more palatable that actually zeroes in on what we want to do, which is a case of ancestries. And you can see that Paizo followed suit and did the same thing with Pathfinder 2nd Edition. It'll be interesting to see what Dungeons & Dragons does going forward when they move on to the inevitable 6th edition, and if it will happen in that time or if they release a revised 5th edition book that takes some of these into account. Now, and not to take the whole suck all the air out of the room, but I think what is interesting most is that this has happened. All these changes have happened in the span of 4 years, as far as just how rapid it's kind of overtaken the hobby. If you went back 10 years ago and asked somebody, well, do you think race is a problematic word? Yeah, but what's more important? The legacy of Dungeons & Dragons, which has race, class, alignment, and so on, or do we jettison this word for the good of society? And so, yeah, it's where the balance is shifted.
Right. That's a really, really good point. So I'm going to say from what I'm hearing you say, Rob, is that if you had to make a guess, you're going to say that Dungeons and Dragons will probably drop the use of that word.
I can't imagine them continuing to use it. I have, and to be clear, I have zero ties with Wizards of the Coast. I do not work with them in any capacity anymore. That's unlikely to change anytime soon. So I have no idea what they're going to do. But I can tell you that knowing the good people who still work there, they're very aware of the difficulties with the game's legacy. And I think it's dangerous, though, to indict D&D because Dungeons & Dragons, as Jason was saying, is a power fantasy, right? And this was very much a white nerd hobby from the Midwest. It only accidentally became something that has been a global phenomenon. So it's going to take some time for the game to catch up as its customer base becomes more diverse, and as we are more sensitive to how certain ideas and concepts can be looked at from various perspectives.
So, Rob, I have a question for you as a designer, and actually, I guess Jason and Brianna, this would apply to you too because you're world building. And you've written a book about your 400-page book about your world. which actually I can totally believe because it's so big. But okay, sorry, got sidetracked there. I've seen discussion online where people are like, they don't know how to feel about the different races or ancestries in role-playing games having like stat bonuses, right? Like, what are your feelings on that? Does that mean anything? No, your people are nitpicking. What do you think?
I think a big part of it is the fact that the word race is used.
Mhm.
I like when there are when there are stat differences. Alignments don't like it all. We've talked about this plenty of times. But I like the stat differences, and Jason and I talk behind the scenes a bunch. I honestly think there should be more, because there are gnomes, and there are orcs, and there are tieflings, and there are humans, and I think that celebrating the differences between those ancestries or paths, or like, just like the real world, there are differences between people. And I understand that with game design, that can be very, very complicated, because then you get into the thing where it's like, well, this is a war game, and if we put women in it, they need to be less strength or something. And that's kind of nonsense. But there's a gnome, there's an orc, and if they both roll the same stat for strength, I think it's a little strange that they're lifting the same amount personally for our world. And I think it's cool if you say, well, okay, you're more leaning towards this because of how you are physically, and this orc is leaning more towards this, but that doesn't mean that defines you. That's just how an orc can easily go become a bard if he wants to. He's still going to be stronger than most bards because he's so big and naturally strong, and that's okay. I think it just makes the world more interesting, just like human differences make the world more interesting.
I had a big discussion with this foolishly on Facebook, as every once in a while I'll post something and it's the dumbest thing, and I say I'll never do it again, and then I do it again. But yeah, I think the word race has like this charge to it, instant, where you want to plant a flag in the sand for either side. Like, I've seen people argue both sides. To me, it's fantasy. And while I completely see changing things in the meta, rules, things like that, like, okay, 20 years ago, every rules book would have assumed the player is a man. Like, that's just how books were written back then, for the most part. And now you see it jump back and forth between, he, her, or them, or whatever, however you write it. What I get a little prickly about is when the world starts feeling like it has to follow all the rules of Earth, which takes me out of things faster than anything else. If we're pretending like there's no difference between, say, an orc and a gnome, or a human and an elf, what's the point of these different races or ancestries or whatever? What is the point of them existing? Something I always found fascinating in D&D was no one's nitpicking about another human's skin color, because they're people with tails and wings and shit. Like, it's like, no, we got bigger fish to fry. So I always thought that was fascinating, and people kind of glazed over that and just decided that there is a correlation between a race on Earth and a race in a D&D setting, which I don't see that. I can understand if other people do and how that could be hurtful, but I think if it's made absolutely clear that this is being written in present day, let's say 6th edition comes out and they decide to use a different word and people are still upset because there are differences. As someone from America, I think it would be foolish to assume that someone from Kenya or Russia or Japan has had the exact same life experiences and strengths and weaknesses as I have. I think that's absolutely foolish. That we should all be different, and that's fun. That's cool to celebrate. That doesn't make it less than. That's interesting that there are these differences.
Rob, what do you think?
Oh, I'm going to come out against you guys on this one. I'm going to make it just to stir the pot a bit. So I got a couple reasons. And first of all, I think you're absolutely right that there should be a difference between a gnome and an orc, especially when it comes to arm wrestling contests, right? We're all on board. However, I think that there's, I think if we step away from Dungeons and Dragons just for a second and think about what this means, what we're trying to portray, and what the implications are for attribute or ability score modifiers that are species based. It's saying by the rules, especially and it's really more important when it comes to intelligence, wisdom, and charisma, and things like that, that this person, because of the way they were born, is automatically not as smart as somebody else.
Right.
Or this person is not as outgoing as this other person because they just happen to have a tail or horns. And we need, as designers, to make up for the difference that we're giving this character sharp teeth to bite people with. So we had to ding this character for -2 to intelligence. The other problem with this too is that because we're talking about potentiality and that these various races are all basically human shaped. They're all human sized. You don't have big lumbering giants. You've got an orc who's probably going to tend to be strong, and you're going to have a gnome who's probably going to tend to be weak. But you can model that as a player in your choices of where you put your scores, right?
Right.
We don't need the rules to say, well, what do you say to the person who says, but I want to play a super strong gnome?
And we had that on the show, right? I mean,
right,
that's
but I don't want the game system, the laws of the universe shouldn't dictate that gnomes are going to be inferior in this place because of their DNA.
Right.
And so when we see literature that talks about other races, especially literature that I'm using the word literature very loosely, but when we see writings that denigrate Black people for being savage or being stupid or whatever else, these are the same kinds of language and same kinds of phraseology that is used unconsciously, invariably unconsciously,
right,
by designers to talk about evil races. And so there's another part of this that gets even more complicated, and it's very difficult as a game designer and a story guy as well, is how do you recreate Tolkien orcs if evil is not baked into their DNA?
And
we're
on record. Alignment should be. We
Cast
don't
out.
like alignment already,
Sure,
so
right.
that's not a part of my conversation involving races.
But to eliminate the idea of alignment, but we still know that chromatic dragons tend to be bad guys. Although you could have a red dragon who's got a penchant for puppies, but more likely he is going to be the archetype itself says dragon is the embodiment of avarice and evil and wickedness that's buried underground. So,
and I think there's some things intelligence score, for example. In our book, we made a bunch of backgrounds, and one of the backgrounds is that you were raised in another culture. And by doing that, like if you are an orc who was raised in an elven camp, you can have the elven attribute for intelligence because it didn't come from how you were born. It came from the fact that the elves have a focus on teaching and the orcs have a focus on learning how to conquer in our world specifically. Sure. I think that's more interesting in the long run. And I understand that not everyone runs their games the same way we do, so we have a certain perspective.
But I mean, people have been homebrewing it anyway, so anybody who didn't like that language took it out or changed it or didn't use alignment but two quick things. I feel like if you're telling a story of an orc who was raised different, you want to be a bard or something like that, 90% of the time, we've had people on the show do something like that. And the story is, I overcame this, or I was raised differently and I don't fit in. I need to find my place, all that. That's where the story is. If we pretend that just doesn't exist, or if you have that 4-foot gnome who wants to be a barbarian and squares off against a 7-foot orc, and we pretend there's no difference between the two, like that gnome doesn't have to overcome a size challenge. Like, I don't know. I know it's fantasy and we're literally whipping fireballs back and forth at each other. And I know that there's some sort of middle ground we can reach. Like, I don't agree with, a race being inherently evil just because they are. I think that's ridiculous. Like, you can't, every member of a race is just evil. They may have different goals. They may be motivated differently, but they shouldn't just be evil because. Just like no race should just be good.
Right, and I think that's nature versus nurture, like in a conversation about D&D. But
I would just, and I think you're circling the point that I really feel strongly about is that role-playing games, especially those of all role-playing games, have to be able to divorce culture from people.
Yeah.
So, and if you can make that distinction, then I think you can have evil societies. I think you could have. I would argue that you could have oppressive, hideous, terrible regimes we see in the real world who are populated by good people, but who are forced to do terrible things. Because it's I either do this terrible thing or my family dies, suffers, or I suffer, or something else happens. So, I mean, I think that you can. I think that's the central thrust of the argument is that they don't. I think the audience, or a sizable percentage of the audience, and I think to myself as well, feels that we should be able to talk about orcs and orkiness as one thing. And then we should also be able to say, and these scarred tongue orcs over here are a bunch of bastards. And they have done terrible, terrible things. And it is okay for you to wet your sword on their green blood and revel in their destruction because, God damn it, they earned it. Now, that said, if that's the only orcs that live in your world, you've come to the same spot that Tolkien was coming to, right?
Right.
Tolkien doesn't talk about orc babies, but I can't tell you how many times I've had a Dragon Mountain thing where we found the kobold babies and we have to have this whole hour discussion about should we kill the baby or not? Is the kobold inherently evil or not? And then no, the kobold's not going to be inherently evil, so as a big and it just gets to this ridiculous, absurd descent down this very well-worn, familiar track. When really what we want to say is that, you know what, kobold babies, they're pretty, they haven't imprinted yet. They can be whatever they need to be. Let's move the story on and get to the good stuff.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
let's go give the kobold babies to a villager somewhere so
or
they
just
can be
kill the
raised to
babies
be
and move
good.
on.
Or something. Like, it's an interesting conversation to take on roleplay wise. If that's not what your group wants to do, fine.
Right.
I think that the main thing is that I don't think that a company or a group on Twitter should be able to come into someone else's game and tell them they're not allowed to have a certain discussion, as long as it's being had respectfully and everyone at the table is being listened to. And I think at the end of the day, that's why everyone has such these strong feelings about races in D&D, is because it feels like one day you're going to sit down at a convention to DM a game and someone's going to call you racist for having an evil orc or something like that. And I don't think that's going to happen, but that's, I think the intrinsic fear, maybe, I don't know. But the intrinsic fear that people feel is like, I don't want to be told that I can't tell a certain story or that I can't have a dwarf overcome a magic handicap or something like that because it's racist in the real world, when what I'm really trying to do is tell an interesting story with my players.
Don't you think though that, I mean, and I totally grok where you're coming from, right? I feel the same way, right? I mean, there is, and it's interesting because I consider myself, though I don't advertise it, to be a good left-leaning person. And not saying that you can't be good and not be left-leaning, but I think that I try to be good in the sense of I adhere to those principles. And I'm pretty good about doing so. Now, I also find, though, that I think that those same arguments that we can use about I don't want somebody else telling me what I can do about or say could be applied to it continues to go on, right? And there is a line, but the question is, where is that line? It's like we don't call people of people of color derogatory names because it's wrong to do.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But that's understood, flat out understood. But when people are people of color are looking at what has been largely a white hobby and start saying, you know, drow are pretty problematic.
Right.
You know, drow really give me the willies. And I've written 2 fucking drow books. So, I mean, it's like, it's really not good at all.
And that's the one I could see the absolute direct corollary drawn. It's like, so these are the dark elves and they're underground and they're evil. Like it's tough. Like that's a tough one to like point to and go.
in defense, it comes straight out of Norse mythology, and
Yeah.
I bet when the first myths of those were going around, there probably weren't a lot. They weren't talking about black people being the smart elves, right? They're talking about the scary elf people who live under the mountain.
Yeah.
So, but that's because, but times change, and times and expectations change, and I think that it's okay to have. I mean, like, I'm still pretty pissed off about having to change Mad Wizard to Weird Wizard.
Yeah.
And I don't blame you, because like I feel like
When it's
but it's a right thing.
stand-in.
But it's the
Right.
right thing to do, because there are probably going to be people who consider mad, crazed, unhinged, and all the other synonyms for mental health in a or describing mental health in a derogatory way, that it's not worth it for me to die on this particular hill.
Right.
And I think companies like Dungeon for Wizards of the Coast is going to have to make those same considerations.
And I think there's a difference, like, if you sat down at a table at a convention and said, I am playing Zagathor, the Mad Wizard, and he's basically me as a wizard, I think people at the table would probably be okay with that. But when you're producing something for the world, and like you said, you can't sit down with every person who's going to look at the cover of your book and explain to them, like, no, he's a cool guy.
and
that gets tough. Like,
it's a really hard tightrope to walk, because obviously you're putting something out for mass consumption, and you have to, even if it's 6 people, it's like, hey man, I don't like that term. There's a part of you that has to think about it and go, okay, then I might have to rethink this. And
I just thought of a good one.
Huh?
From our book, I just thought of a good one.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's been dozens of things that
Yeah.
we've had to change or rethink and all that, and it's just, we're in a different spot in 2020 than we were in 2012, and it's changing so rapidly. My worry is that, and dude, I'm a left-leaning guy too. I don't want to be the asshat that gives the slippery slope argument. I don't want a world where, these ancestries and, different body types and different upbringings don't mean anything. I don't want a world where someone walks in and feels physically uncomfortable because it's like, man, I feel like that's basically blackface. I feel like, and it comes from Norse mythology. It has nothing to do with that, but, and we have to run it through that filter, and it gets tougher every year, because the more people get exposed to this, the more varied the opinions are going to be, and the more backgrounds and different dispositions that'll be introduced.
It's one of those kind of things where it's like, I look back at my therapist and I were talking about this very conversation this week, and she mentioned that Kurt Vonnegut wrote a short story, I believe, about the perils of overly cautious language and overly cautious societies, where you kind of completely level the playing field, where you put weights on ballerinas' legs so they can't kick as high or whatever else. And I had not read the story, so this is only secondhand. And he's certainly pointing at a serious danger. And I think that some of the great comedians would probably also say this is absurd, and that we should really suck it up. And, life is hard, and sometimes you're going to be disappointed and sad. But then on the other hand, it's like, if I made something for 2,000 people but I made 6 people really upset and hurt their feelings,
right,
I'm going to feel like an asshole.
Right.
And I can't.
Yeah.
And so that's the whole thing about the political correctness. I even hate that phrase. It's just being mindful of other people.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what makes our position as creators so dangerous, because we don't want to say that the gnome can't be as strong as the orc, but we also have to, as game designers, we also have to model reality in some way.
Right. Like, okay, if there were a race of people that had my body type, and one walked into a village of elves and it's like, I'm going to be a track star, I'm going to compete with you. You can try. Like, I don't expect to be able to keep up with someone who's 130 pounds and can run on the wind and all that stuff. And it's tough to, like, and then you get into a whole thing about, like, I want to bring a wheelchair to this campaign and I want to do that. And you don't want to tell someone no. You don't want to say you can't do that, because again, it's a power fantasy. It's meant to,
sure,
Right.
But can't you model that character? But let's go back to let's say we've got the elf race argument thing. So in this case, we've got my body type. I'm going to use mine so I can talk about it more freely. I've got a bit of a beer gut. I'm not in the greatest shape, but I do walk every day, and I have strictly plant-based diet, and I take a big bucket of vitamins and stuff in my body every day. Still not all that healthy, and I'm middle-aged. My flaws come from the decisions I've made. And if you're talking about this as a character, my character probably has extra ranks in game design and probably has extra ranks in black metal music because hail Satan. And then he probably also has extra ranks in history and literature and so on. But you look at me and my choices and my character development, I suck at sports and my vision sucks. And, I'm probably going to get winded climbing up 30 flights of stairs. But these are things that happen to be about my character's life experience and the things that I've done and chosen.
Right.
Where ability score modifiers and what makes them dangerous is that they are predisposing your character to things. We're monkeying with the DNA of an organism. And if we can say it's not fair to do this with strength because strength you have to model that some other way.
Yeah.
But intelligence is really, really, really dangerous.
And intelligence is you're the first person to make an argument that I go, okay, I definitely can see that. And the instant I heard that, it's like, okay, well, let's not muck with the base stats. Let's make it more of a background thing. Let's make it more of a, that makes sense. It's like, okay, you're probably going to lean heavily into this, but you could totally fight that. And if you were raised differently,
and maybe if I were designing an RPG, maybe instead of having okay, this is what happens to orcs, this is what you get because you're an orc, it can be here's 6 different things to choose from if you're an orc. Which one of these do you think fits your character best, or something like that, so that you can still have those inherent kind of differences that come from looking completely different. Because again, that's the one-to-one thing that does not work in fantasy worlds, where it's no, you're physically different, but that does not mean that you're not capable of learning and you're not capable of being charming. That's Nightcrawler's entire thing, is that he's ugly and charming. He freaks people out when you look at him, so he learned how to juggle. And
have you heard that accent? But I'm saying, I like the idea though of an orc who is in polite society, and maybe there is that side glance every once in a while of are you gonna freak out? Maybe they have they have to take a deep breath. Yeah, Worf basically is. It's okay, I'm gonna count to 10 because I'm really upset. Maybe they get a little more prone to being upset. That doesn't mean they can't exist in a town or city and stuff.
We just got to be careful with, we got to be careful with the magical Negro trope, where we have the magical orc coming into play because he's a great exception, and that's kind of what I'm arguing against.
That's true too.
Culturally, you could have terrible orcs.
Yes,
but it has no. But that's the culture argument. And as far as what I did, Weird Wizard is. Instead, there are no stat modifiers for any ancestry. They're all gone. Instead, if you are playing a gnome and you're 8 inches tall, it's going to affect how hard you hit with a weapon. And so that's just a general rule. It's not a thing about being gnome is to be wee, but that's not a flaw.
Right.
You could have a 15 strength, but it's not going to translate very well because you're 15 strength for being a little gnome. But you're not going to hit nearly as hard as the big hulking ogre who's got all the hair all over his body, the big scary horns, big mouthful of teeth, and is swinging a big pudens. You're going to see a difference, and none of those are delivered through things that are easy. You build a game around to model what you want them to do, and I think that's one of the things where D&D gets into trouble, is that there's so much of his legacy design, because there is an audience, and you are always at risk of alienating your audience when you go too far, which is why 4th edition had so much trouble. It's not that 4th edition was a terrible game. It was a great game. Nope. But if it had been presented as a 3rd edition game, I think people would have bought it.
Yeah. If
you just changed how it looked, it would have been fine.
I feel like that's the middle ground I was talking about. If we can accept the fact that things need to change, and that simple thing, it's let's just not tie it to ability scores. Don't make it something that's so at your core you couldn't be because on the flip side, there's got to be some spindly orcs out there who just skipped leg day and didn't there's got to be some, right? So Like it's like I wouldn't be a baker. I'm not into the murder thing. That's not my thing. So I like the idea of just finding ways around that, and nothing against Wizards of the Coast, but I don't think they're going to be changing. Like 6th edition is going to be pretty much the same as 5th edition. It was beyond some major stuff in 4E, like it was kind of the same as 3E. Like there's a thing.
There's continuity.
Yeah.
Having worked on, I did products for 3 editions of D&D, and I know that when I was part of the design team for 5th, I was a big and vocal proponent for keeping certain elements of the game true. For example, daggers should do 1d4 damage, just the way it is. Daggers have always done 1d4 damage.
Right.
Don't muck about with it. You know what? Chainmail should be either, if we're going descending armor class, it should be 5. And if we're going ascending armor class, it should be 15. And why is that? Because that is true. That is the truth of D&D. Just like, we want to, and I know alignments are a touchy thing.
You don't have to roll the hit
like
with magic missiles.
Gold dragons are lawful good. Just don't mess with it. It's just the way it is. Because they're not people, they're monsters. And they can be emblematic of huge, sweeping, more Morkockian conceptions of law and chaos. That's what we can do. But, I think there's a difference between saying a longsword should do a D8 damage or D12 against creatures of large or larger versus, we have to rethink how we actually present race. And I think we're at that point now where they just have to do it.
So, okay, we are out of time. And that was actually a great one to end on. Some interesting things happened. First of all, let me thank you guys because I was able to extract myself entirely from the conversation and let you guys go at it.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No. That's the dream of a moderator, right? If I cannot even have to participate, then I can enjoy. And I would submit to you that the medium allowed for that, because normally when we're up on stage at a table, you feel like you have to take turns, right? So anyway, but also, I have never seen opinions, during a discussion kind of shift and change and mold into something new.
That's a discussion.
Cool. Right. I don't want to go into any discussion ironclad. Like I cannot be, that's not a discussion anymore. You're just talking at somebody.
No, that's a good point. But
I know. Yes.
That panel, I haven't. So that was amazing. That was wonderful.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Always good to see you two again.
Yeah, dude, thanks for talking to us. Really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
All right, I'm going to hit stop.